What if I told you that Ferrari has just discovered such a deep failure in his technology that he doubts all his development of the season? What happened in Hamilton's car in Zandvoort that left Maranello completely in shock? Zandvoort. A stirred, narrow route, where each error is paid with walls and where the margin for technical deception is minimal. The place where the true strengths and weaknesses of each car are unmasked. And it was precisely where Ferrari lived one of the most alarming moments in his recent history. What began as another day of free practices ended up becoming a technical nightmare that lit all alarms in Maranello. From the first stint of Lewis Hamilton, engineers began to notice inconsistencies, small variations in car behavior that did not square with simulations. At first, the team tried to explain it through the classic factors: track temperature difference, variations in wind pressure, irregular wear of the tires. But soon they realized that this went far beyond a mere environmental fluctuation. Hamilton's SF25 telemetry revealed unusual responses, impossible to replicate in the virtual tests performed in the Ferrari simulator. Curves in which the car should be stable suddenly showed loss of sudden adhesion. Sectors where advantage had been projected were critical for the balance. And the most serious, each small adjustment based on simulated data not only did not improve the car, but worse it. At that time, the alarm was no longer a technical whisper, but a cry of despair. The engineers decided to review not only the weekend data, but complete weeks of work accumulated in the factory. It was there when they discovered the truth. A systemic failure, a chain of errors that contaminated from the entry of sensor data to the prediction algorithms in the simulator. And the most shocking of everything, this was not a new problem. It was a technical cancer that was silently affecting the car since it was designed. The SF25 had been developed on a basis that was literally lying. For a team like Ferrari, who lives on precision, which bases each decision on decimals, this represented a betrayal of his own process. Free practice in Zandvoort was not only an operational disaster, it was a painful revelation. A window to the fact that all the human and technical effort invested in the development of this machine was based on a digital illusion. Hamilton, in his internal statements, described his experience behind the wheel as surreal. According to sources close to the team, he said the car seemed completely oblivious to what worked during the week. And if that says a pilot with 7 world championships, one who has worked with the best teams in the hybrid era, then the problem is not small. Zandvoort was more than a race, it was a real-time technical autopsy. A mirror that forced Ferrari to look straight ahead at all that perhaps denying. And that mirror returned a disturbing image, that of a giant who has been developing cars on simulations that do not reflect reality for years. An error that not only explains the lack of competitiveness in certain careers, but calls into question the foundations on which this season was built. The first great alarm signal was the difference between simulator data and the real behavior of SF25 on track. But they were not obvious failures. It was not rude errors. They were subtle details, small lags in the lateral load, micro variations in weight transfer, deferred rear axle reactions. Imperceptible changes for an outer eye, but absolutely catastrophic for the operational precision required by Formula 1. In the center of this disconnection, the engineers discovered a chain failure. The sensors that fed the simulator data were calibrated with erroneous values. Not for a single cause, but for a combination of multiple factors. Degradation of components, failures in the interpretation software, and something even more worrying, an inappropriate review of the mathematical model that interprets the conditions of the circuit in real time. This means that every return in the simulator was a lie. Not a great farce, but a subtly manipulated narrative that led engineers and pilots by wrong roads. Each adjustment in the suspension, each aerodynamic configuration, each setup recommendation was born of data that simply did not correspond to the reality of the track. Hamilton, who had blindly trusted this tool since his arrival in Ferrari, was one of the most affected. He spent weeks adjusting his driving style to the virtual SF25 model. Endless hours perfecting trajectories, braking, traced, believing that it would reach the weekend with a perfectly understood car. But what he found was quite the opposite. A car that responded with violence, unpredictability, and worse, technical incoherence. The frustration soon became infected with the rest of the team. It wasn't just Hamilton. Leclerc had also begun to notice inconsistencies, but attributed them to the natural sensitivity of the car. No one imagined that the root of the problem was deep in the simulation system. Beyond track damage, the discovery in Zandvoort raises an even more serious issue. How many technical decisions, aerodynamic updates, motor maps, or career strategies have been taken based on erroneous data? How many lost points? How many poorly directed evolutions? How many pilots have been unjustly judged for not adapting to a car that was never as they were promised? What Ferrari faces now is not just an operational problem, it is a crisis of trust. When your simulation system deceives you, it leaves you without weapons for war. Modern Formula One is won before the car touches the asphalt. It is won in laboratories, in data, and predictions. And Ferrari, during all this time, has been fighting with a broken compass. This discovery marks a before and after. The Maranello simulator, once an avant-garde symbol, is now synonymous with silent betrayal. And rebuild trust, both within the team and in the car itself, it will not be a task of days. It will require redesign processes, validate each data from scratch, and even rethink the technical philosophy on which this season was built. And the most tragic of all this was discovered not in a secret test, not in an engineering meeting at the factory, but in full free practice of a race weekend. In the worst place at the worst moment. When an engineer works with erroneous simulations without knowing it, his job is not doing badly. He is being the victim of a broken system. And that generates a devastating internal tension. The reports that emerged behind the practices showed that, immediately after the finding, Ferrari's technical direction convened an emergency meeting. It was not one of those typical post-session meetings. It was a closed, tense meeting, where it was discussed whether it was necessary to temporarily suspend the use of the simulator and review all car data validations. Some sectors even requested an external audit of the system. That alarm level is not common in Maranello, and it is understandable. The engineers had been trying to adjust the SF-25 without success, following the advice and predictions of a system that now know that it was defective. It is like building a building on false foundations. However bright the design is, at any time collapses. The moral impact of knowing that you were perfecting an illusion is devastating. And for pilots, the situation is no less traumatic. Hamilton, who came to Ferrari carrying not only with sports expectations, but with a symbolic burden like the 7-time champion that should return the glory to the Scuderia, was emotionally touched. Spending nights in the simulator, arguing with the line engineers per line of the layout, checking each wear pattern, and then going on track and feeling that nothing fits, it is not only frustrating, it is demoralizing. It is said that Hamilton, after discovering the magnitude of the failure, requested a complete review of all the data used in recent weeks. It was also reported that he stopped his simulator sessions until they secured his integrity. That reaction speaks of a pilot who has not only lost faith in the car, but in the process that sustains it. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, expressed what many inside the team felt but did not dare to verbalize. Defined the day as a total disconnection with reality. He had been pointing out correlation problems from the preseason, but in a high-pressure environment such as Ferrari, where each comment can be interpreted as a destructive criticism, it was not taken with due urgency. Today, those signals are evidence. And it is not just pilots and engineers. The strategists, the analysts, the track team, all were making decisions in real time with information manipulated by a vitiated system. At each briefing meeting, it was assumed that the data were precise. That what was seen on the screens was a faithful representation of the car on the track. That illusion has been destroyed. And the emotional cost is deep. On a technical level, Ferrari now faces an existential dilemma. Continue using a simulator that they no longer trust, trying to adjust on the march? Or stop everything, redesign the system from scratch and lose valuable weeks in the middle of the most competitive championship of recent years? None of those options is good. And both imply an immediate sacrifice that can leave the team out of the fight for the title. In parallel, another fear arises. How far does this failure get? If the system has been delivering erroneous data since the conception of the SF-25, how many design decisions have been affected? How many aerodynamic parts, suspensions, motor maps have been optimized for a car that does not really exist? This is not just an operational problem. It is a poison that may have contaminated the entire season. And this is where the most disturbing element enters: external perception. Rival teams, media, and even sponsors begin to ask questions. In modern Formula One, where the narrative also competes, to be exposed in this way not only makes you vulnerable on the track, but on the institutional level. Ferrari is injured. Technically, morally, psychologically. And leaving that hole will not be a matter of updating a piece. It will require a restructuring that touches the very core of how this team conceives its way of competing. Hamilton was clear in his evaluation after Zandvoort: "We have to start over, from scratch if necessary." That phrase was not just an emotional reaction. It was a declaration of principles. Because sometimes, to advance, you have to break with everything that no longer works.